And so grateful for our worship team, and specifically thankful for Maylee, who helped us lead out today. She's been our college worship leader and led this last Wednesday. She has her last time, and she's making some transitions, and she has just been a consistent, steady force of the presence of God. And so anyway, love Maylee and love this team, and glad to see all of your beautiful faces here, and thankful for all of you who are watching at home. As I often say, you're the real heroes, because virtual church isn't always so easy to do at home. And so we're so grateful for your intentionality, continuing to stream in with us, and believe you're going to get touched by God today. And I need to ask all of you at home a question, and all of you in the room a question. Here's my question. Have you ever needed a vacation from your vacation? Have you ever gone on a vacation, gotten home and said, now I need a vacation? Especially you parents, right? Because vacations with kids are trips, right? They're not vacations. So sometimes you come home from vacation and need a vacation. That's exactly what happened to my family this past spring break, as we were blessed with some tickets to the Big 12 basketball tournament that was in Kansas City. Someone also gave us access to a cabin in the woods during that time. All this boy needs right here is sports and the outdoors, and it is a guaranteed fuel up for my gas tank, and I was really looking forward to this trip. We got some very meticulous instructions from the owners of this home, because we didn't really know them. They were friends of friends, and so I was like going to follow these meticulous instructions down to the letter of the law, because I was adamant that we were not going to cause any drama at this house, okay? Famous last words. As we roll in one night, and we got up early the next morning. It's kind of chilly outside, and I put the coffee on and get a little fire going. My wife, Blair, joins me, and we're just sitting around this fire having this magical moment, really, of just reading the Word of God together and drinking coffee. And I lean over to her, and I'm like, honey, I don't know that we could have made it another day without this break. We were desperate for this time. And she's like, I totally agree. Almost on cue, she says, does it look like it's getting a little smoky in the room right now? Now, at this moment, the way I think is, if there's a fireplace that's not drafting adequately, I'll step outside, kind of re-look into the home to kind of get my bearings and see if I'm seeing right. And I did not even get a chance to look back inside, because when I opened the screen door, smoke was barreling out. And I remember it was like covering our Suburban. It was like hard to see. And I was like, oh, Lord. Now, up to this point, Blair's been like, you think everything's okay? And I'm like, sure, everything's fine. At this point, I'm like, everything is not fine. And so I look back in the house and see the house is filling up with smoke, and it looks like someone's taken like the yellow pages, set them on fire, and just threw them into the living room, okay? So like there's these little things floating around. I run out into the front yard, and I look back at the house, and smoke is not just coming from the top of the chimney, it's coming from the base of the chimney where it meets the roof, and smoke is coming from there as well. So now I am freaking out completely, and I run into Blair, and I'm like, get some water, put out the fire, and I need some water as well. I've got to figure out how to get on this roof. And I kid you not, Blair walked up with 2 little red glasses of water at that moment, and I looked at her like, well, thank God that if this house goes up in flames, we've got 2 shot glasses of agua that I can kind of throw on the roof, and we'll be all good. I'm not joking. And so I am trying to figure out how to get on the roof, and the roof extends past the porch. It's really high. I'm doing this number, and I can't get up there. And I just think I'm going to have to try to go upstairs and go out through one of those windows. And so the owners of this home did a fantastic job of making sure you will never leave their home. It is every screw and nail Home Depot's ever owned is into those screens. And I'm like, well, I'm going to have to bust through these screens and cost them a few bucks to save their whole house. And I finally get out of one of these screen windows, and mind you, I am in my house shoes, my pajama pants, like a t-shirt, and I'm crawling up with my 2 glasses of water to the top of the roof to throw onto this little, place in the chimney. I go back down. Blair has a pot of water that she's found now. I go back up. I dump that out. It's obviously not enough. And then what I began to see is smoke is coming up from various shingles all over the roof. Now, at this point, I'm sure you're thinking, how is it that every time this guy shares, he has another story of something dumb that he has done. To which I would say, I don't know why God does this to me, except that he knows I need sermon illustrations. And so he keeps throwing me into moments like this. And so I am up on top of the roof having a freak out when I look down the road and there's a truck coming down the road. And there he's coming down the long gravel road, and I'm like, oh, right. They had said an air conditioning repair guy was coming sometime. This must be him, and I'm hoping he'll show up with all his technical skills and just kind of put me at peace. Thank God he has a ladder. He puts it on the house. He shoots right up. He begins to look down the chimney, look at the smoke coming up, and he's like, this is not good. I was like, we are in trouble, okay? This is the point where if you're watching TV, you're watching the people on the roof and you're thinking, get out, it's gonna blow. You know, you're screaming at the TV, but I'm the guy on the roof going, it's gonna blow, and I'm gonna be here with my 2 glasses of water so I can say to these owners I've never met, I tried, okay? So he goes back down, he gets the hose, he gives it to me, but it's not very long. So I have to stand at the edge, and the water pressure, I'm not making this up, it is so soft, I'm squeezing the end, and it's like, like, you know, and he, by God's grace, has a nozzle in his truck. He goes and gets it, throws it to me, I tie that on, and now I can actually make it all the way to the chimney, all the way around it, and it starts to drizzle rain. Now, if it was pouring, I'd be grateful because God's providing the water before the fire. That would be a great story. Wouldn't it be like, he provides for you before you get there? I could have preached that message easily. But that's not actually, you know, what's going on. What's going on in this situation is it's getting worse, and now it's just drizzle rain so that I get soaked in the chill, but it doesn't actually stick to the house. So I'm freezing out there, standing there with my hose, while this guy goes and searches in the attic to see if there's fire. And he comes back out, he says, from what I can tell, the interior lining of the fireplace was kind of archaic, and it caught on fire. That's what you saw going in the house and outside of the home. And I think there's some cracks in the chimney as well. So I think smoke was going into other places of the house. There's not fire in other places of the house, so you're going to be fine. I would just suggest you just spray down this roof. So I'm not joking. For 20 minutes in my PJs, I'm on a stranger's house with my hose just going like this to every shingle going, God, how on God's green earth did my vacation start out like this? But as I'm thinking about this, and as you're listening to this, I'm sure you can put 2 pieces together. It's not that difficult to realize that what was going on is that this house was seemingly coming apart on the outside because of something that needed attention on the inside. This house is seemingly coming apart on the outside because there is something that needed attention on the inside, and now everybody else is paying for it. And in my vacation, you know, it has to do with some interior lining of a chimney and some issues that they had with cracks in the wall. But in our lives, what ends up happening is there's these other things that get in, these wounded places, these disappointed places, these broken places, these sinful places that are on the inside. And if we don't pay attention to that on the inside, then it begins to come out onto the outside, and then it begins to affect others as well. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at a story of someone who had an issue on the inside that needed to be attended to. And you're going to watch how Jesus pays attention to places on the inside that need attention inside of you. In this woman's case, it was an issue of bleeding that she was dealing with, and it wasn't just for like a few days or months. This was going on for years, and it had become chronic. And here's what you need to know, and some of you already do, is that if your internal disturbance is chronic, then there is hopelessness and fear that is pouring out all over you. Questions like, how long do I have to deal with this? And what do I actually do about this? And you'll hit the wall over and over again and wonder, can I even take another step? And in that moment, what you need is the title of this message. And our message for today is entitled, A Divine Interruption. You need your vacation to get interrupted. You need the internal bleeding inside of you to be interrupted by something divine. And so if you're taking notes, then you can put at the top, Divine Interruption. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at a story in God's Word where we actually see an interruption, because we are in part 2 of a series we're calling Always Only Jesus. And what we're looking at is how in Jesus' day, if you really studied what was going on in society and in culture, and you compared it to where we are, you would realize it's actually very similar. And even as we mentioned last week, maybe the way women felt or the way God followers felt who were kind of leaning in over and over again without seeing the promises, you'd look and go, it actually seems very, very parallel to ours. And if they needed Jesus to show up in their day, we need Jesus to show up in our day. So the reason we're doing this study, should you wonder why, is because we're hoping in these weeks that you will hear the stories of Jesus, the words of Jesus, the ways of Jesus, and something in you will see his character. And when you see his character, you can't just help but feel love for him. You see love for him, and you begin to build intimacy with him. And that's what we all need right now. We need that kind of interruption in our life more than anything. And I really believe that today when you leave this room, you'll be more in love with Jesus than you walked into the room. Because you're going to watch how he handles change, and it's going to be different, I think, than the way you think he wants to change you. I mean, anybody who's followed God for like 10 minutes knows that you need to change, right? And the way that we go about the change is what matters. And what they are going to find out in their day, in their age, is that Jesus handled change a little different. Unlike their laws and their customs and their regulations, Jesus didn't start with the outside. Jesus started with the inside. They didn't know what to do about that because he said he came to bring a kingdom. And that kingdom they thought would be external. So pull out your palace, your army, and give him a crown. And instead he goes, no. What I'm going to do is begin my kingdom inside of you. I'm going to start on the inside. So he begins by doing something on the inside that then can transform them on the outside. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a story that is just one long series of interruptions. Jesus has just landed in this one space and people start crowding him. He's loving on them, ministering to them. When a man comes up and he interrupts Jesus on his knees, he says, my daughter's dying. We need to go now. Would you go? And it doesn't take any arm twisting. Jesus doesn't make him go through a PowerPoint presentation to decide if he should go. It's the desire of his heart. He just takes off with the man named Jairus and begins to help. When another person shows up and interrupts that interruption. Let's pick up the story in Mark chapter 5. So Jesus went with Jairus. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. Everybody pause. Take your age, add 12 to it. So you get to experience bleeding from the inside, which would have been painful physically, but insanely embarrassing as well until you get to that age. And most scholars would say that this woman had a disorder from the womb. So she has an issue on the inside that must be attended to. And it's been going on for 12 long years. Now, here's what you need to know. This may have been painful for her and embarrassing for her, but there's something else as well. There's an additional weight that is attached to her because according to the customs of her day, she is ceremonially unclean. So she carries this label, stigma, in truth, that she is unclean. And the law of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, those 5 books, the Torah, put together what the people's laws were for that day and how to act in that day. And so what this woman has to do is figure out how is she going to live with this ongoing drama in her life. Now, a lot of times we look at those laws and we're like, those laws are just Old Testament, like messed up, weird rules, okay? Not at all. You go through the over 600 rules and laws you see in that, and what you will find is that God was actually trying to help his people know what to do between them and God and between them and their community when the holy would meet the unholy. What are the provisions there to try to walk in relationship in the midst of it? The problem is that the Pharisees, the older brothers we studied last week in the week 1 during the prodigal son story, they had fallen in love with the cleanness you would get to and the provision itself instead of realizing that God was trying to put remedy that would keep relationship. That was the heaviness that was going on in those days and the breaking apart. So the rules were not bad. However, if you don't spend a lot of time breaking them down in the 21st century, they're very confusing. And they're actually very awkward to read in mixed company as you're about to learn. Because what we're going to do is go back to what this woman's religious law would have been, what she would have been following. You've got to go to your favorite book of the Bible in Leviticus chapter 15 to be able to find out what her law was. Let's go there and let's see what she would say. When a woman has her regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean till evening. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Anyone who touches anything she sits on will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean until the evening. Whether it's the bed or anything she was sitting on, when anyone touches it, they will be unclean till evening. All right? Did we get awkward enough here? All right? I mean, all the high school guys are like, why did I come today? Does this even affect me? You know? Here's why. Because one day you're going to get married, and you're going to have a daughter, and you're going to be sent to go to that aisle of the grocery store you've never been in your entire life. And you're gonna start grabbing the 16-pack of paper towels to put into your cart and put that little pink and purple box right underneath it. And you're gonna go to the express lane and hope that it's quick. In that moment, every one of your best friends will line up right behind you. I'm preparing you today for your Leviticus moment then. Aren't you glad you came to church, all you high school boys, okay? Now, everything you just heard doesn't relate to this woman except, it relates to all women at that time. What you're about to read in the next verse is what actually applied to her specifically. It says, when a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. So now we understand what those rules were that she had to follow. Now she has to follow these in accordance with those others as well, because she has a continued problem that goes on, and she has been labeled unclean. Now again, I wish I could unpack this. Maybe one day I'll do a women's Bible study, and we'll go a little deeper into Leviticus to take you there. Because a lot of times as women, you might read this and be like, this is ridiculous, all this junk we have to carry. And I would say at one level, you are right. And at another level, here's what I wish you could see, that if you see, number one, you're not being singled out here. Just earlier in Leviticus, God went through the men, everything that they need to do as well. But when you begin to see what he was putting in place, he was actually putting these things in place to protect women, actually specifically single young women who could become taken advantage of. So he had a whole list of things he was doing to, in effect, put a wall around them to make sure that nobody took advantage of a vulnerable person. For example, even look at verse 28 and 29, what you had to do. When she's cleansed from her discharge, she must count off 7 days, and after that, she will be ceremonially clean. And on the 8th day, she must take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting. This right here would be a sacrifice that she would have to give. And it was actually the cheapest sacrifice of all the sacrifices you read about. He was in effect saying, I'm not going to allow anyone to take advantage of someone who could be taken advantage of. We're going to make it as cheap and as possible for you. So even in these rules, you see that it was still, though, something that she had to carry for year after year. This would have affected her financially, this would have affected her socially, and this was affecting her spiritually. This is something she's having to carry. And now that you understand that she's had to carry that for 12 years, isolated and unclean, which I can't imagine the feeling of that shame and what she must have felt, how dirty she must have felt. Let's learn something else about her in Mark chapter 5, verse 26. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Those words are weighty. If you are in this room or watching right now and you've dealt with chronic pain, you're relating to this more than the rest of us. You know what it's like to live in that pain. If you're a parent, you've got a kid in that situation. I had 2 daughters that went through something with their hip for a long time, and you're just like, going to the next doctor, go to the next specialist, go to the next person, travel to the next city, do everything in your power, and every time you hit a wall where you're like, what do we do? This is where, when it turns chronic, it turns hopeless, especially when you realize instead of getting better, she's getting worse. How is that possible? Well, you could say it's potentially because they did not have access to the medical wisdom that we have today. I mean, I actually heard this week of an ancient medical document that said that if you would take an ostrich egg and burn it and take the ashes of that and put it in a little pouch and carry that around, you could get better. I'm not a doctor. But I'm thinking that did not work. And I don't know how much money the woman spent on ostrich eggs and burned them and created ashes, and her little fanny pack was not creating the healing that she wanted. They didn't quite have our technology that we had today, but regardless, things inside of her are sometimes getting worse. Now, let me pause for a minute, because sometimes I think when we read this story, we read this verse particularly, it feels like sometimes we're taking a little shot at the medical community, like, yeah, what we really need is God, you know? And I just want to make a quick stop here to say to all the doctors and nurses and EMTs and even counselors and therapists, especially during this last season, y'all have worked tirelessly round the clock to serve our community, and we are so grateful for you. Raise your hand if you're one of those people, or, you know, look at, wow, a lot of hands in this room. Wow, a lot of you that have served. So let me just pause for a minute to say to all of you that what I love about you is that you make your home in a place none of us want to go, right? Like if we go to the ER or the ICU or the oncology clinic, we are now in the last place we want to be on planet Earth. You've chosen that to be your constant, to just keep helping people no matter what. Here's another thing I love about you. When those of us like me, we find ourselves in the ER, we find ourselves in this emergency, you've never seen a medical professional go, hey, before I get started, can I know all the details of what happened to get them here in the ER? Because I'm wondering if they actually deserve us going to work on their 12 broken bones. Like, well, they were in a race with somebody and they were going 90. Oh, yeah, then they don't deserve it. Let's just stick them somewhere. They don't go into an interview to determine if you need help. They just go straight to the mess. They do everything in their power to keep this patient alive. That's what they do. That's who they are. That's the beauty of what our medical professionals give to us. And this woman has tried to go over and over again, and even some scholars will say that in that day and age, maybe there were some medical people that were taking advantage of her. And so as a result, her finances are gone, they're dried up, and she is at a place of exhaustion. So she's got to try something different. She gets a chance to in verse 27. It says, and when she heard about Jesus. Another version says, when she heard the reports about Jesus. Now, here's the deal. I wasn't there. I don't know exactly what reports that she heard. But we learned last week that reports were spilling everywhere that this guy was hanging out with sinners and tax collectors. So we can kind of make a little jump and see she's probably hearing that this man, Jesus, whoever he is, will allow anybody to get around him. So if you are blind, if you are poor, if you are lame, if you are broken, if you are sinful, he doesn't seem to care. You can come close. And that must have given her just enough faith to think, then maybe I could go to that guy, but there's another thing. It could be, if that is true, that is going up against a completely different thought she could be having, and it's what we just read in Leviticus. If she leaves her house and goes into a crowd, she is now potentially making everybody she touches unclean. You know, we all feel this right now in our COVID world. Like, okay, am I going to go out of my house? My quarantine, what am I going to do? She's feeling like, if I go out, everybody who I touch could be unclean. Do I go put the mess on others that I've been dealing with, especially if this thing doesn't work? Again, I don't think that her two conflicting feelings are that different from what we feel. It's this knowledge that Jesus will let anybody close to him, but am I really going to go out there and put my mess out there again? That's why I'm so thankful life groups are starting. I hope you'll get involved in one, or if you're not, and hope that you'll jump into yours here in the days ahead. It's that safe place where you get to bring your mess to a group of people who are like messy themselves and have all found Jesus to be a divine interrupter. And she's standing there in the crux of these two feelings. And then the story continues in verse 27. We read the rest of that. It says that she came up behind him in the crowd and she touched his cloak. Actually, Luke's version of this story said that she touched the tassel of his robe, meaning the few little strings hanging down from his robe. She reached out and touched that part. Like, I'm not even worthy to touch him. If I could just get that little string. Well, what was she thinking? We find out in the next verse, verse 28. She says, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. if I could just get that little string that's hanging from the bottom of his rope, maybe then I could be healed. Now, here's one thing you need to know. We don't know from the text that she's aware she's dealing with the Messiah, the Son of God. It's a little early in Mark's gospel, so Jesus really hasn't revealed himself as the Messiah, so we don't know what she knows. But think about this. Whoever this man is, this great man, this prophet, whoever he is doing godly things, if I touch him, he now becomes unclean. You read it earlier, didn't you? Just the bed, just the sheets, just the clothes, all of that's unclean. If I just touch him, I make him defiled by me. So she has to be willing to defile the Son of God in order to give her healing a shot. And something inside of her is thinking, if I just touch him, though, maybe I'd be healed. It'd be worth even defiling this man. And I want you to see the very next word that you see in Mark's gospel, immediately. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. She feels that what needed attention on the inside has been paid attention to, and she feels it immediately. And this is what I love about this verse, is it is the perfect depiction of the gospel. This is the perfect depiction of what happens when we look at everything about us that defiles us, makes us dirty and gross, and we are willing even to touch the Holy One and say, I need your forgiveness from all of this. It has separated me. My unholiness has separated me from the holy. And I'm willing to even surrender my life to you. If you want it, I'll take it. I'll give it all to you. Ask for forgiveness for all this junk. I'm willing to put that defilement on you. And that's when you realize that he is standing there saying, son, daughter, I already took it and put it on a cross, and I paid in advance your punishment, your penalty to take all of your defilings so that immediately something could come inside of you called the Holy Spirit that would begin a work of regeneration, of renewing, of restoration, so that you would have a place of healing on the inside that could affect your outside. You just watch the gospel play out in Mark chapter 5, verse 29. And immediately she is healed. I hope you catch that. Ephesians chapter 2, that beautiful verse you've heard before. You have been saved by grace through faith. And this is not of yourselves. It's a gift of God, not of works that you have done so that nobody can boast. She just got a gift straight out of heaven that just landed in her lap. She's been healed. And what she's hoping, from what we know of the text, is that she can get her blessing and get out of there without anybody noticing. But what you're about to see is Jesus doesn't allow that to happen. Again, you need to put yourself in the story. And you need to read the Bible, because in the Bible you see stories of how he treats people, because that's the training of how he treats you. And right here, you're about to see that how he handles people who are just like, I'm just going to get in, get my blessing. People do this in church all the time. I'll get in, get my coffee, get my blessing, I'm out, gone, right? It's like, we need announcements for people serving. I didn't hear that, coffee, serving, coffee, blessing, out. Hey, we want you to know. No. And there are others that are like, no, I just feel dirty. I don't even think I should be in that room. Those four walls, that's like holy people. I'll just get my blessing, I'll get my coffee, I'll get out. Here's what Jesus does to the people who don't want to get noticed. Y'all ready? Let's look at verse 30. And at once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? This is what he does to the one who doesn't want to be unnoticed. Who touched my clothes? Now, a little time out here. What would you imagine is the expression on Jesus' face when he asked this question? This is an important question. Whoa! Who touched my clothes? Maybe the thing that came in your mind looks a little something like this. He's kind of looking down going, really? I had a meeting. Don't know if you heard, there's a girl that's dying. Could you kind of hurry it up? We need to figure out who touched my clothes. Look at the disciples in the back. They look so confused. Like the sovereignty of God has just been totally destroyed in this one moment. You have totally confused us here. So do you picture a stern, confused Jesus turning around going, really, who touched my clothes? These are my favorite clothes. Or do you picture this Jesus going, hey, I need to know who touched my clothes. I have something for the person who just had the guts to do that. This is a question you have to answer. And I would encourage you to answer it before you get to lunch today. Because if you don't, you'll forget it. Because the expression you see on Jesus' face right now is indicative of the filter you see God through. And if the expression on his face is either stern towards you, constantly confused, maybe annoyed by you, that you are just a constant interruption in his really important day and night existence, then you'll just keep putting further and further distance between you, and it will not be an always only Jesus world for you. It'll just be a big, distant, the unholy and holy world for you. We'll see it at Christmas and Easter. But you won't feel the intimate connection with him that you long for. But if you see, that's if you see this, but if you see this, you'll know that when he says, hey, whoa, let's pause for just a moment, that there is something that's coming from him you don't deserve. It's like this unmerited, unconditional stream of favor and kindness towards you that's coming 24/7. And it'll give you a little bit more of a desire to turn right around and look back at him. This is amazing to me. Remember, this story, we interrupted another story. A girl is about dead. And Jesus doesn't turn around and say, there's something more important. He has to pause, find the one who is trying to go unnoticed and pull her a little closer. So as this message is going on, I hope you're identifying your own internal bleeding, your own insecurity, your own rejection, your own anxiety, your own sin. I've heard people even recently talking about how during this pandemic time, there's been more sexual temptation than ever before, and people have failed more than ever before and have felt like it has just made them gross and dirty. It's why we're continuing with something we call Pure Desire in our Conquer groups. They happen on Wednesday mornings at 6 a.m., and we're going to give you more details next week because there are some people who probably are distancing themselves in God because they've done the unimaginable. You've carried an addiction. You've carried your bitterness. Whatever your thing is, you've carried this internal bleeding. And you need to know, how does God look at you when you have something like that all stored up inside of you? Well, he's going to ask this question. We're going to see what actually comes out of him. In verse 31, it says, the disciples look at him and go, Jesus, you see the people crowding against you. His disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? Aren't we thankful for the disciples? If not for the disciples, Jesus would have just veered off over and over again. They were great teachers for this rabbi. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. He's like, no, we're not going there yet. Who touched me? I need to know who touched me. This is this girl's worst nightmare. Everything she didn't want to happen. She is now in the back. She's being called to the front for a meeting with the Son of God, okay? And here's what you need to see. You need to know, what is he about to say to her? Because if you think he's going to interview her to see if she's worthy of what he is going to give her, then you'll picture him like this ER doctor waiting to do the interview to see if you're worthy. But what's beautiful is he's already healed her. It was a free gift. So he's not interviewing her to see if she's worthy of that. He's actually trying to draw her close to maximize the power of this healing in her life and to take it even one step further. He's already gone to the mess. He's already brought the healing. What's he going to do now? I love how Luke summarizes this. Luke was a doctor, so he was a little bit more detailed in a lot of his writings. I bet he was more intrigued by this story than the average writer. He explains it. He says, then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed. Some of you came to church for that one sentence. That you cannot go unnoticed, came trembling, fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, ladies, do you ever want to talk about Leviticus 15 in front of all these people? Everybody say, hey, how's everybody doing? Tell your name, your favorite ice cream, and all the Leviticus 15 stuff you've been dealing with lately. In front of all the people, she told why she had touched him. and how she had been instantly healed. The only way you get the awkward out there, the only way you talk about the untalkable, the only way you go into that place is if you have looked into the face of automatic grace and you've seen someone who touches you and lets you touch them regardless of where you've been. That is what gives you the impetus to have the faith that you need. And so last week we talked about grace. The automatic overflow is faith. And you see her saying, this is what happened, and here's where I'm at. What do you think he's going to say? We got to keep asking ourselves that question. What do you think he's going to say? Is he going to say, okay, that's great and all, but next time, let's ask before we take power from the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, you know? Is that where he's going? You know the story. You know that's not what he's going to do. In fact, he's going to use a word that you will not see anywhere else in the New Testament but in this verse. In Mark chapter 5, verse 34, he said to her, daughter. You won't see that again. He is using a term of endearment and identity on this one who, up till now, we don't even know her name. She's just known by her condition, the label and the stigma that's on her. He says, daughter, and I've got 3 daughters. So I can feel the weight of him just going, daughter, there's nothing you can do to make me love you anymore. There's nothing you can do to make me love you any less, daughter. And he's giving this term of endearment and identity. And then he continues with the rest of verse 34, and he says, your faith has healed you. Oh my gosh, she must have been going, what faith? God just went, ooh, string. I mean, like, just had that much faith. This is an important verse. Because if he doesn't say these words, she can walk out of there and say, hey, go see a man that if you touch his magic clothes, you get healed. And people could have come out saying, where's the magic robe guy? I'll pay $5 to touch the robe of the magic guy. And Jesus is looking at her going, no. I'm not wearing my magic clothes today, and that's what healed you. It isn't about me. It's not about my robe. It's about your faith. Your faith healed you. He's honoring that little bitty seed that made her touch a string. He say, your faith has healed you. And then he just brings it home with the final part of verse 34. He says, so go in peace, go in shalom, and be freed from your suffering. And this word suffering in the Greek, it actually means whipped or scourged. He was saying, that thing that's been beating you for 12 years, you're free to that right now. And this woman has the ability to get up and in a moment, know, I've been healed on the inside, and now that is affecting all of my outside. She has no medical bills now. In a moment, her financial situation changed. In a moment, now she can go be with people. Now her relational, social status has been completely shifted. Her spiritual status is 100% clear. I'm a daughter and I'm free because what was on the inside was touched and now it's manifesting on the outside. You know, I started by telling you about when I needed a vacation from my vacation. I don't know if you caught all the timing of that, but that was at spring break. And that basketball tournament was canceled we were supposed to be at, and a few other things happened. And I found myself at the end of that spring break on conference calls with our church leadership trying to figure out if we were going to keep our doors open or shut for, we decided, a few weeks at that time, and things would grow. I came back to Waco, and I'm now tired and need a vacation. But instead, we're having a task force meeting about all the different things we're going to do in this church, and then how are we going to handle this time, and then we reopen, and we're going back and forth. And all this time, I'm thinking, I am emotionally exhausted. Like, I don't have anything to give. A lot of you have felt that. I know you have. What's difficult if you're a preacher is that you got to stand up here on Sunday and you're the advice giver. You're the hope giver, which feels very hypocritical when you're thinking, I don't have any of that right now. And what I didn't say is one of the things that wiped me out was that I felt like God had given me a word that someone I knew would be physically restored, and instead they died. So now I have a theological wrestling, and when you have emotional weariness and theological wrestlings that compound upon things like pandemics, you have a weight of 1,000 pounds on your soul, and you got to stand up here and say, but God's good. And I'm supposed to preach the Sunday before Easter. So I decided to talk on the Last Supper, and we were going to talk about the Passover. And I was going to parallel the Passover of that day to things we could learn in this day. I'm sure all of you remember it. It was amazing. I'm sure it just plays in your head on repeat. Just in case you don't remember it, both of you who don't remember it, what we talked about is how in their Last Supper, they would have had 4 cups that the Jewish people walked through in their Jewish Seder. And I explained each of those cups what they meant. And when I got to the 3rd cup, I talked about this was the cup of suffering that they would hold up in their meal and I would explain it accordingly. Now, when I was in my sermon preparation, I could not remember all the details about this. And the more study I did, I got more confused. And then I remembered Beth Moore had done a teaching about this years ago. And so I went, put her teaching on my phone, and it was lunchtime, so I drove to Schlotzsky's, okay? This is how emotional I am right now. I'm just like, I ordered a turkey guacamole sandwich, cracked pepper chips, and sweet tea. That's like the level of my emotion at that moment, okay? Sweet Miss Beth is playing in the background, and I get back to the church, throw my phone up, she's still talking, I'm unfolding all of my food as she comes to the 3rd cup. Not even joking, I take a full bite of my sandwich. And when I did, she said, and if you go to the Gospel of Matthew, what you will find is he does not lift a 3rd cup. The only time you see the 3rd cup is when he is in the garden on his knees and he says, take this cup of suffering from me. And you and I both know God did not take that cup of suffering out of his hands. He left it in his hands. And let me just say to all of you friends who may be listening to this wondering, why am I holding what I'm holding in my life right now? It could be that it is absolutely paramount to your destiny on planet Earth, and that's the only reason a loving God would keep that cup in your hand at this moment. And as she said that, I've got it just about memorized because the amount of times I listened to it, I fell on my knees in my office, mouth full of my sandwich, bawling my eyes out. He had just set up a divine interruption for me. Because if I didn't understand, why am I going through all this, God? I don't get it. If he does not touch me on the inside, I don't have the energy to live anymore on the outside, to keep pressing through this. But God in his goodness met me right there. And in June, on an extended on a vacation with my extended family, they were saying, how did you make it through the ups and downs of all those things? And I told them at this moment, we're all sitting around this little fireplace, and now we're all in tears. And I was like, he showed up. He met me on the inside. That's the only way I had the ability to live on the outside. And as we sit here this morning, I have to think that there's some people who are out there right now and you're going, I need the divine interrupter, the divine healer to touch something on the inside. And you may think that what you need is your marriage touched. But actually what you may need is for God to go back to some places where there's been shrapnel in your past and do some healing on the inside. You may be sitting there identifying a sin going, I hate that I do this thing, and he wants to go back and show you his character that he never changes. You may be annoyed by certain elements in your life on the outside. He wants to go under the hood and touch you on the inside and be that divine interrupter this morning. And all he's looking for is for you to say, could I reach out one more time for that little piece of string on the edge of his robe? And I think the answer inside of all of us is yes. And so as we close, why don't you stand to your feet? And those who are at home, I don't always do this, but if you wouldn't mind standing to your feet as well, just as an act of reaching out for the hem of his garment. And I want you to close your eyes, and as your eyes are closed, picture the smile of Jesus as he says, who needs my touch? And as you reach out to him, let this song that we're about to sing be your prayer. Jesus, we stand here as a people in need of a touch from heaven. If we just string together all of our best attempts or all of the things that we know to do, we know it's not a formula to get you to move. So all we have is the faith inside of us that rests on your unchanging character and says that you still let anybody up close to you. And there's immediately that you still offer for those who say, I believe again. And that's what we say in this very moment. Give us the grace to believe again.